If we want to find solutions to today's challenges and build bridges across divides, we need a deeper understanding of global issues. The Pulitzer Center supports journalists all over the world who report on topics like climate change, public health, migration, and more. We share that reporting through public events that engage wide audiences and lesson plans that inspire the next generation. Support journalism and education for the public good. Become a Pulitzer Center champion today.
Je m'appelle Jean-Charles Guilloila. Je suis journaliste d'origine et de nationalité camerounaise. Je vis à Yaoundé, la capitale du Cameroun, et je suis boursier ou l'un des boursiers du Rainforest Journalism Fund, Pulitzer Center. Et j'ai réalisé un reportage qui portait sur l'impact du travail des agro-industries dans la déforestation au Cameroun. J'ai écrit deux cas pratiques. Le cas de Sud Cameroun EVA, qui est une agro-industrie qui est basée dans la région du Sud Cameroun, qui est spécialisée dans la culture de l'EVA. Et l'autre cas pratique, c'était celui de Sosucam, la société sucrière du Cameroun. C'est une société française dans la Haute-Sanaga, c'est un département de la région du centre Cameroun. Et la Sosucam est spécialisée dans la culture de la canne à sucre depuis 1965 au Cameroun. Je vous ai pris le cas de Sosucam qui a pollué pratiquement tous les cours d'eau de la Haute-Sanaga, ou juste, s'il faut le dire, des arrondissements d'un Koteng, de Banjok et de Lébizoum, où elle est installée pour faire la canne à sucre depuis 1965. Les autorités administratives me l'ont témoigné. Aujourd'hui, les populations parcourent des dizaines de kilomètres pour chercher un point d'eau, question de se ravitailler, parce qu'en fait, elles ne peuvent plus boire, consommer l'eau du village parce qu'elle est déjà polluée. L'environnement est pollué, les populations tombent malades. Voilà en réalité ce que viennent laisser ici en Afrique ces agro-industries qui sortent de l'Occident et de l'Asie.
Moi, je suis descendu leur donner la parole et les populations m'ont dit merci. Et je peux vous dire, les populations m'ont dit que Sud Cameroun EVA, quelques mois plus tard, a entrepris des démarches de négociation avec les populations par l'intermédiaire d'une ONG pour voir dans quelle mesure on peut améliorer les rapports entre la communauté, entre ces communautés-là et l'agro-industrie. Mais après ce reportage-là, les populations elles-mêmes m'ont dit, c'est vrai que la situation n'a pas encore totalement changé, mais elles commencent quand même à voir, l'agro-industrie qui les contacte de temps en temps par l'intermédiaire de cette ONG-là, pour essayer de voir comment est-ce qu'il peut avoir des négociations.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to When Forests Disappear, Investigating Power in the Global Supply Chain. This is day 3 of Environment Redefined, the 2021 Pulitzer Center Conference. I hope you enjoy learning more from Jean-Charles and about his work. I am Gustavo Faleiros, the Pulitzer Center Environment Investigation Editor, and I'll be the moderator of this panel. As our audience settles in, please let us know in the chat, where are you listening from? I am speaking from São Paulo, Brazil, and once again, welcome to this session. For those who did not join us before, the Pulitzer Center is a journalism and education nonprofit organization with the mission to elevate public engagement with underreported issues. While the organization is based in Washington, D.C., our staff and our work are global. We support more than 170 reporting projects each year in collaboration with news outlets around the world, bringing together this work by themes on our website, not only in the environment, but also racial justice, migration, public health, and more. We don't stop with the reporting. Our education programming spans from elementary schools to graduate degree programs and outreach to the broader public. This conference, Environment Redefined, is the Pulitzer Center's 4th annual conference. In the past years, we've explored topics of gender, peace and conflict, and religion. Last year, when our annual conference was canceled because of the pandemic, we hosted an online series focused on justice issues. We're so glad you're joining us this year on our first virtual conference. And if you're inspired by what you hear today, please consider supporting our vital mission. A couple of logistics before we start our conversation. We'll begin with short presentations from the panelists and then answer questions from the audience. So please add your questions at any time via the Q&A icon. Note that all attendees are muted, but if you cannot hear us, let us know via the chat box. We are recording the sessions to post online, and we are also live tweeting. You can join the conversation with the hashtag #EnvironmentRedefined. And one final note, please stay online once the session ends to participate in a brief survey. So today we brought a stellar group of journalists who have investigated and keep investigating the most powerful economic sectors on the planet. And power is, in fact, a very important word of the session, as many of the stories you will hear about connect the local environment destruction with global supply chains. It's my pleasure to welcome today's speakers, Annika McGinnis, Brenda Evans, Jessica Brice, and Wahyu Dhyatmika. I will start with Annika. She's going to do the first presentation. Annika McGinnis is a multimedia journalist and media development specialist from the United States. With Africa Water Journalists, she's the co-founder of InfoNile.org, a geojournalist platform that supports journalists in the Nile Basin to report data-driven stories and issues of water and environment. Welcome, Annika. And tell us more about the transnational and collaborative approach of the InfoNile investigations. Welcome again.
Thank you so much, Gustavo. I hope everyone can see my screen. Okay, great. So I'll just take a few minutes to go through what we do as InfoNile and our approach to collaborative journalism. I'm really happy to be a part of this panel and learn from all of you as well. So InfoNile, we are a collaborative cross-border group of geojournalists, and our mission is to uncover critical stories on water issues in the 11 countries of the Nile River Basin. And we do this through data-based multimedia storytelling. We're a part of Water Journalists Africa, which is a network of water journalists across the whole continent, founded by my colleague, Frederick Mujira. So the Nile River Basin, just to give you a bit of context, it's a shared transboundary river basin with the longest river in the world, the Nile River. And it includes 11 countries, including Tanzania, Rwanda, and Burundi, then all the way up to Egypt. So more than 270 million people live in the basin with very different climates, cultures, and histories, but the shared river in common. So some of the issues that we see with the media in the region is that a lot of reports remain within the individual countries. There's a lot of nationalistic media, although there are very many common threats to the whole river basin, including climate change and other environmental threats, water scarcity, and other threats. But we see that a lot of the time the media doesn't communicate the science and the data, and what comes out is more of the political narratives in each country. So as InfoNile, we try to bring together the scientists and the journalists, and also bring together the journalists from the different countries for more collaborative journalism. So our basic approach is to identify a theme of common and cross-border importance. So these are some of the themes we've looked at in the past, including water scarcity during COVID, climate change solutions, and wildlife trafficking and conservation. And the project I'll focus on today is the one that we did focusing on foreign land deals. We source for credible data that's cross-cutting across the countries. And then we work with local journalists in our network who report in-depth stories looking at the relevance of that broader issue in their country on the local level. So we mentor and train them in data journalism and environmental reporting. We work with them to create data visualizations, which they then publish in their local media houses. We translate the stories to regional languages, and then at the end, we create cross-border multimedia projects, which combine these local stories with cross-border data analysis and different kinds of geojournalism visualizations and interactive maps. So we've tried to track some of the impacts of our stories, and this is based on a survey that we conducted last year of some of the impacts of the stories, that they led to a government investigation or policy change, or other media covering the story, which we know leads to increased awareness, public officials citing the story. So this is the project that I wanted to share with you today. It's called Suck Dry, and we looked at large-scale foreign land deals in the Nile River Basin. It was published on several different media houses in the region, as well as our own platforms. So we started with a common data source, which is data collected by the Land Matrix. The Land Matrix is an independent global land monitoring initiative, and it compiles data on land grabs from governments, companies, NGOs, the media, and citizen contributions. So through analysis, we found that 16.9 million hectares of land have been concluded from 445 individual deals in the Nile Basin countries, with many more still in negotiations. Most of these are in agriculture and others are in forestry, renewable energy, and mining. And the investor countries came from all over the world. So this included Western Europe, the Middle East, the UK, the USA, and other countries. So we created an interactive map based on this data on the InfoNile website, where you can get country level data and also zoom into individual land deals, find out their negotiation status, the company, the country, investors, and the intention of investment. Then we worked with 8 different local journalists to report stories based on the data in their countries. So in Ethiopia, which is the second largest flower exporter in Africa, we found that flower companies are exporting flowers and displacing local communities. So up to 10 of the largest horticulture investments in Ethiopia are located next to the Blue Nile, which is this, next to Lake Tana, which is the source of the Blue Nile. And production of flowers actually requires an enormous amount of water, about 20,000 Olympic swimming pools of water each year. So the flower farms are contributing to a huge extraction of water. They're contributing to fertilizers and pesticides that's leading to the growth of water hyacinth in Lake Tana. And of course, the profits are exported abroad where the flowers are going to. In Egypt, we found that Saudi Arabia and the UAE, which are facing diminishing water resources in their countries, are acquiring huge areas of land to grow fodder and crops. For example, the Toshka project in Egypt, which originally aimed to create fertile farmland out of the Western Desert to boost food security for the Egyptian economy, is now 49.4% of this project is actually owned by the UAE and Saudi Arabia, mainly to grow alfalfa for export. We also found in the investigation that land and water is being sold at much, much lower prices than the market value. For example, some of the land was sold at just $3 per fadan at a time when the average land price was $637 per fadan. And the investor also purchased water, which is worth 24.3 million USD for only 1.2 million USD. So this is really alarming, especially in a country which has, water scarcity like Egypt does. In Kenya, we also looked at an American company which acquired a 175 square kilometer area of swampland next to Lake Victoria to conduct large-scale rice, banana, cotton, and sugarcane production. 2 local county councils leased away this land without the community's input, leaving the local people without a means of livelihood and displacing about 6,000 people. And it also destructed the wetland environments and is contributing to pollution of the water in Lake Victoria, transboundary lake. Then in Uganda, we looked at large-scale forestry projects, which specifically looking at Busoga Forestry Company in eastern Uganda. Many of the forestry projects are owned by companies from the UK, Germany, the Netherlands, and Norway. They're large-scale timber plantations. So these companies are selling carbon credits on the carbon market, and a lot of their mantra is that they're fighting climate change through reforesting degraded lands and selling the carbon credits to polluting companies abroad. However, even though part of the climate finance requirements is that they support the local communities, we found in Mayuge, Uganda, that just the fact that the company was there and acquired the land in the forest, they ended up displacing 4 villages that had been living on that land for generations and were actually pushed to living in the buffer zone between the forest and the lake. So we didn't find that the company was not attempting to support the local communities, but just the fact that the communities had lost their land, they were really pushed into a state of marginalization from which they haven't been able to get out. So this story really looked at some of the unintended consequences of climate finance projects, even when they do say they claim to be supporting the local communities. Similarly, in South Sudan, we looked at a lot of land grabbing along the Nile, which we found that a lot of it is coming from a lack of clear land laws and processes after South Sudan gained independence in 2011. So I just want to show quickly the final geojournalism project that we developed. We just find.
It's not sharing any longer. Can we?
I think you can see it now.
Yes.
Yes. So this is the final project that we developed, and all the stories were first published in the journalists' local media houses, and then this was the combined investigation that we did. So we tried to use different kinds of geotechnologies to showcase both like the broader issue of land grabbing in the Nile Basin and then the individual issues that we looked at. So this is an interactive map of land transaction deals in the Nile Basin. This is a video summarizing the data. And this is a visualization of all the land deals in each country. We also used a lot of satellite imagery and some drone footage as well to give different perspectives. This is a visualization using satellite imagery for 2 different years to showcase change in the land over the years. So this just gives you an idea of the kind of final project that we produced. And then this project we published on 3 different media houses. I think this one is not loading. Yes, okay, so some of the lessons that we learned, we realized that most of the land deals in the Nile Basin are actually water deals with companies acquiring land, but in the meantime, they're actually acquiring a whole lot of water from the Nile River at a very low price. And we also realized that stories about transboundary waters must have a regional significance, and in that way, collaborative and cross-border journalism is best. Conducting investigations and accessing officials and data in countries where press freedom is restricted, such as South Sudan, is very challenging. So sometimes we had to actually realign our story to be able to publish it in the local media house. For example, we could not report about the land deals in a very negative way at the top of the story, but we had to bring that in lower down in the story based on the censorship in the country. We also realized different ways to support media houses to publish data visualizations, especially those that have never done it before. Sometimes using JPEGs instead of the embed codes and helping them to be able to embed these visualizations on their online sites. It also takes really intense field reporting to establish trust and find out the truth in an investigation, especially where local people have been harmed by big corporations. You sometimes need to go to the field multiple times and really explain the purpose of your reporting, and really also be careful of unintended consequences when you're reporting about marginalized groups. And then I think the biggest lesson is also that in many cases, even where local communities have been harmed, it's hard to identify who is the good guy and the bad guy. But in the end, we realize that there's a lot of negative effects that arise from the nature of the transnational economy, legal structures, histories. So we really need to report on the structures that end up causing harm and also a lot of the nuances. Yeah, so recently in the past year after we reported this investigation, we've been doing a lot of solutions journalism around deforestation issues. For example, reporting on eco-carbon in Burundi, or people who are planting trees in Uganda to kind of combat the effects of landslides in eastern Uganda. And we've actually seen a lot of impacts from these stories. Like in Burundi, the journalist told us that after his story was published, the company got a lot of attention and was able to establish another network in another city. So I think people are really inspired by stories of solutions of people who are working against, some of these bigger problems. And this is where we should also put our attention as journalists. So that's my presentation, and I'll be glad to take your questions later. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Annika. It's great to hear about this great combination about large data sets, cross-border investigations with local stories and partnering with local outlets. This is really interesting, and we will discuss more. Now we will hear from Bram Abbas. Bram is a freelance journalist, investigator, and photographer from the Netherlands, based in Bogota, Colombia. He holds a master's degree in global criminology and has done research for think tanks and NGOs. As a journalist, he had his work published in the Miami Herald, The Guardian, Newsweek, and others. Since 2007, Abbas has covered mining conflicts in Venezuela for Info Amazonia and was the lead journalist of 3 collaborative media investigations that have won several awards, including 2 online journalism awards and 1 Gabriel Garcia Marquez Award. Welcome, Bram. So the supply chain of gold is one of that we can really call it global. Your stories have revealed an intricate relationship between legal and illegal actors in the sector. How to investigate them? Can you tell us a little bit more about this?
Thank you very much, Gustavo, for your kind introduction. And thanks everyone for connecting to this session. Myself, I'm not a journalist, but I'm a criminologist turned journalist in the field. And I think in my investigations, I try to apply a lesson that I learned while studying criminology, which is basically that environmental crimes don't know any country borders. And this is why we often speak about transnational environmental crimes. For example, if we speak about the mining sector, which is basically the sector we investigated most, we can focus on the impact of a project, an exploitation, which is oftentimes at first sight very regional. But when we dive a bit more into the power dynamics behind the mining project, if we see where the money comes from to actually invest in a region, to buy up a land title, to contract people, this is often money that flows from the global north to the global south. We see that minerals, when extracted, go the other way around. For example, we've been investigating the mining bonanza in southern Venezuela. Venezuela is a country that most people know because of its petrol sector. It's true, for the last 100 years, we can say that their economic model was based on oil. But we see that there has been a switch and thinking in Venezuela, which is a country that now spirals in a very deep humanitarian and economic crisis, which partly has to do with the complete collapse of the oil sector in its country. So we saw that Venezuela actually chose to deepen its extractivist model, bet big on mining. As a journalist, I've been working on mining conflicts already in Peru, Bolivia, and Colombia. When we heard that Venezuela was betting big on large-scale gold mining, we wanted to see how this was working out in the field, and we set up our first trips to actually go to southern Venezuela to identify who are the stakeholders participating in mining because the decree pretended to invite about 150 globally operating corporations, but what we actually found out is that none of them is participating in southern Venezuela, but that we merely see non-state armed groups in collaboration with corrupted state forces that are operating wildcat mining operations throughout the savannas and Amazon region. This is when we decided to continue with the first project, basically to identify stakeholders and actors in Venezuela South to get a first glance on these mining conflicts. Let me share some pictures whilst I speak about the platforms that we've published with multiple partners. When we first decided to go to Venezuela to basically check out who's there and what's going on, we also found out that there is a bigger story to make, which is actually the story about who is buying the gold internationally, especially when we speak about the trafficking of illegal gold, in which the power relations became really, really important. Not only in the mines itself, where we needed to see how do state groups, non-state armed groups, global buyers and investors interact, but also how do they treat the local population and how do they operate to get the gold out of the country. When we had the information that the gold was actually moving from Venezuela to neighboring countries like Colombia, the Caribbean, where it would be laundered with paperwork, false paperwork from these countries, it could enter the markets in the United States, Canada, and Europe, which is very interesting for us because we know that the United States sanctioned the Venezuelan gold sector in light of its grave human rights abuses and the corruption behind this sector. But we saw that there are very easy tricks to basically launder the gold into the legal supply chains. When we saw the routes over which the gold was trafficked, we decided to construct an alliance with different local outlets in the countries that can be seen perceived as transit countries for the gold. And we looked for alliances with journalists in the consumer market countries, basically in Europe and the United States. Therewith, we were able to build a team of international journalists, which was the only way for us to actually trace and track the illicit gold, because local journalists know their context is best. They speak the language, they have the network. As a foreign journalist, there's also a limit where where I don't feel legitimized anymore to really go into the field and do the investigations. And working with these local journalists, we actually were able to gather a very colorful panorama of quantitative data, for example, leaked databases from government officials, export numbers, production numbers, but we also got a lot of qualitative data from journalists going into the field, meeting miners, traffickers, traders, law enforcement officials, and therewith we had a very good combination of the two to come up with a very interesting narrative for our story. The third project that we did, after identifying what are these mining conflicts about, what are the stakeholders and who are the actors that move behind it, we also thought about what's actually impacting the environment so much, because it's not the gold that is contaminating. The gold is the mere objective of the extraction, but actually it's the mercury, which is a toxic substance which is used in gold mining because it binds with gold, and it's the mercury that's toxic and impacting the ecosystems. Everyone speaks about mercury because it has an environmental impact and also a health impact, but we decided to also look at the power relations behind the trade in mercury. Oftentimes it's assumed that mercury is cheap, it's just a facilitator of gold mining, but we find out that there's actually a very big illicit economy in the black market of mercury, where sometimes mercury is imported in a port city, but when it reaches the mines, its price already increased 10 times. So a lot of money is made in this market, and we try to identify all the relevant stakeholders. So in our projects, we found that it was of key importance to actually work with local journalists, not only for the quality of the investigation, but also to have a network through which we could publish in local media outlets and languages of the countries where these journalists are working, which is very important for us because of course, we want to publish for a global international public, but we also want the people in the countries where the gold is mined, trafficked, or bought to know about what's going on. And therefore, the connection with local journalists was very important. What also helped a lot was that together with local journalists, we were able to identify so many relevant sources, and speaking with all these people involved in the phenomenon or in the supply chain enabled us to give a face to crucial actors in this debate. And oftentimes we learned that, for example, the usual bad guys, such as the miner or the trader, are oftentimes victims of circumstance, or subsistence miners who, because of bad state policies, don't have any alternatives to make a livelihood. Giving them a voice was very important for the story, and also for comprehending the issues at stake, and maybe switching our focus a bit from the usually the miners who are perceived as the bad guys, but also to global players, towards governments and traders who actually have much more responsibility and a very stronger role in the power relations. When speaking briefly about impact, it's a bit difficult for me because we definitely had a lot of impact, which can be the republication by other media. We've been mentioned in government debates. We've been used in policy papers. But we also know that when we identified, for example, the gold trafficking route from Venezuela through the Dutch Caribbean, Curaçao and Aruba, that the respective governments of the islands basically decided to halt the trade, the import, the transit of Venezuelan gold, which can be perceived as a good result because we actually blocked this trafficking routes. But in practice, it meant that the gold just went elsewhere. It went to a different country, a different transit point. So it's definitely an impact, but being journalists, we also need to track and trace the impact we have and what it causes, and if the problem doesn't just move elsewhere, and what can be perceived as a positive impact of our reporting or not. So this is the brief introduction I wanted to give about the work we've been doing, and I'd be happy to take any questions after the other panelists.
Thanks so much, Bram, and thanks for bringing so much of this nuance and difficulties of reporting on the ground. I think you brought so many interesting elements for our discussion, so I'll incentivize the audience to start thinking about the questions, and you can place at any time at the Q&A session of the Zoom. But I think Bram brought a lot of interesting ideas for discussion, either from impact or working with local reporting partners, which is something that concerns a lot the work we do at Pulitzer Center, and also looking at more local power relations. I think these are all very important issues. Thanks, Bram. Now we're going to hear from Jessica Brice, who is a senior editor from Latin America at Bloomberg News. She has lived in São Paulo, Brazil for 15 years and worked on various beats from commodities to government and markets. She served as Bloomberg's Brazil bureau chief for 5 years, and more recently has focused on coding and data journalists to produce hard-hitting investigative work. She's born in San Francisco and received her bachelor in economics at the University of California, Santa Cruz, and a master's in creative writing from UC Riverside. And Jessica has recently joined as a fellow of the newly launched Pulitzer Center Rainforest Investigations Network. Welcome, Jessica. So you have been working with global supply chains for years, and now it seems that you're going deeper in your investigations, especially about the beef supply chain. Can you tell us more what you've been up to? Welcome, Jessica.
Sure. Thanks, Gustavo, and thanks to everyone who's joining us today. As Gustavo mentioned, I've been here in Brazil for about 15 years. I've typically been working as an editor, and I've covered, beats from politics to markets. Commodities has always been a big focus of mine, given the importance to the region's economies and cultures. And so, as a Pulitzer Fellow, just joining the network, I'm really excited to get the opportunity to dig deeper using some of the data skills I've gained recently. I'm at the beginning of my investigative journalism drive, so I'm excited to be here with some pros who have done some really extremely good work. When talking about the Amazon rainforest, the beef industry, and its supply chains have been in the spotlight as the key drivers. Let me share my screen with you. Let's see, how do I get here? Here we go. Okay, so the beef industry, as I said, has been like the key driver in Amazon deforestation. The problem, you can see at a glance that, here we go. You can see at a glance that looking at the numbers that as the herd in the Amazon region the various states increases, tree cover loss accelerates.
Jessica,
and in some cases,
just seeing part of your screen. Can you?
Oh, are you? Okay. What parts are you seeing?
Your desktop with the picture.
Oh, okay. So yeah, sorry, I'm on the wrong. I have two screens here. How about now?
We're still seeing your presenter's screen. Oh yeah, now you see the slide. Thank you.
The slides. Okay. So so I hope you're seeing the change in the number of cattle and the tree cover loss. So as cattle increases over the past 10 years, which is when a lot of the beef companies promised to really start monitoring their direct and indirect suppliers, you can see that the cattle numbers have increased a lot in that period, but the tree cover loss has continued to sort of accelerate. There was a period in which it looked like those numbers were coming down. In the most recent years, we've seen those numbers go up quite a lot. In some states like Pará, the tree cover loss has been really significant. Brazil is the world's biggest beef exporter, and the beef supply chain is probably one of the most complex globally as well. We're talking about something like 2.5 million ranchers and a few thousand slaughterhouses and about 215 million head of cattle spread out over 3.3 million square miles. That's not much smaller than all of Europe combined, but you don't have the significant infrastructure, you don't have the roads to crisscross the land. There's large populations there, but it's not huge in comparison to other parts of the world, and so it's really hard to keep track of what's happening in those areas. But if you look at some of the maps, and this is a fantastic resource that I absolutely love from the Global Forest Watch, you look at some of the maps, and as you're looking at the border of the Amazon right here in these states, that's where the beef supply chains are really booming, but that's where the deforestation is happening as well. And so it's a huge challenge, and the core problem of the sector, I would say, is probably traceability and transparency. Cattle that are born on illegally deforested farms will often hop from one ranch to another before being slaughtered. A lot of really incredible work has been done on this topic already by groups like Amnesty International, Greenpeace, The Intercept. They've hit that story relentlessly, and they've been shining a light on how the indirect suppliers in this region are contributing to global supply chains. And because of that, as a result, we're seeing the three biggest producers in Brazil, JBS, Marfrig, and Minerva, they've stepped up their promises to map out what's known as their indirect suppliers. The problem is that they've made these promises before. And as I mentioned, like back in 2009, 2010, they said they were going to map this indirect supply chain. And so, of course, there's going to be a lot of skepticism over the promises that they're making now and whether they're going to follow through. There's criticism over the timelines they've laid out to tackle the problem too. Like we're looking at like a 5-year horizon to find out really what these supply chains, the full supply chains look at. On the government side, I would say that transparency and accountability is actually moving backwards, unfortunately. As I'm digging into this story for the Rainforest Investigations Network, I feel strongly that holding the government accountable as well as the companies needs to be a key focus as a next step in stopping deforestation related to the beef industries. And so That's what I'll be up to over the next year in which I'm working with the network. I'm looking forward to hearing any questions that some of the panelists or some of the participants have for me.
Thank you so much, Jessica. And thanks for inspiring work. I think also some of the issues you brought are great for our discussion, dealing with accountability and transparency. I think these are some of the topics we would like to hear some questions as well. Thank you. And finally, let's hear from Wahyu Dhyatmika, who has been covering politics, society, the economy, city issues, and current affairs in Indonesia since the 2000s. He's the currently editor-in-chief for Tempo magazine, the flagship outlet of Tempo Media Group. During 2019 Indonesian general and presidential election, Wahyu and his colleagues founded sekifakta.com, the first fact-checking collaboration platform in Indonesia. He was also part of the initial team that founded indonesialeaks.id, the only whistleblower secure platform in Indonesia. I should also mention that Tempo and its reporters have been great partners of the Pulitzer Center, doing projects with the Rainforest Journalist Fund, and most recently, also one of the reporters, Baja Hidayat, joined the Rainforest Investigations Network. Wahyu, as an editor, you seem to be leading an effort to really connect the dots and show the big picture, how global supply chains are affecting the forests of Indonesia. Please tell us more about that. Welcome, Wahyu.
Thank you, Gustavo. It's really an honor to share the platform with other really outstanding journalists this morning. Let me first share my screen and share several stories that might answer your question, Gustavo, on how we've been doing our work and try to connect the dots. But first of all, let me just emphasize the importance of this topic, because you know, exposing the power network, the power dynamics behind deforestation, and also how it relates to global supply chains is probably is the key in trying to change people's perception on, you know, how this deforestation happened, how the economical activities of these companies is really harming the environment and it's affecting people's life. Doing any stories around environment, I think, should always goes to that step, move one step closer to exposing that network of supply chain and power, because then it will add to a more quality public conversation and hopefully creating the impact that all of us want, which is a change of perception and more public support for environmental protection. Let me first begin with sharing this story. We did this last year, around August last year. It's about one of the biggest forest fires that happened in Indonesia in 2019. It's a collaborative work with Malaysia Kini in Malaysia, Mongabay, Betahita, and an NGO working on environment advocacy called Auriga Nusantara. And I should also mention that this story is made possible by the grant from Pulitzer Center. So the idea was how to link the forest fires with palm oil plantation and logging companies that has been using and is given a large area, concession area by the government to build their plantation. Because all this time, these companies always refuse to acknowledge their part and never been held accountable for the forest fire. So we try to expose the link, and we do it from using satellite imagery from 3 different parts of Indonesia, Central Kalimantan and West Kalimantan, where the biggest forest fire happened, and also in South Sumatra. So we identify the hotspots in those provinces and layer those hotspot imagery satellites with the concession area map that belong to the suppliers of these companies, and also with the indirect suppliers that also provide palm oil and logs for these big corporations. This is one example of the satellite imageries. We took it from different time during the forest fires. You can see from the top left pictures where before the forest fires, and then it moved to the top right, and then to bottom left. And we were able to link that before. This is the concession area of the company called Bumi Mekar Hijau, part of the Sinarmas group. Before the forest fire, there is no plantation, but after the forest fire, they start opening their plantation. The same here in Kalimantan, in the company concession area belong to Kalimantan Prima Agromandiri. This is part of IOI group in Malaysia, based in Malaysia, one of the largest palm oil company in Malaysia. You can also see some of the hotspots before the forest fire on the bottom left picture, but afterwards, after the forest happened, they start opening up their plantation on that area that used to be on fire. So that's one of the link that we managed to expose. The second story is about coal mining. This is happening also 2 years ago, 2019. This is when Indonesian Ministry of Environment gave this permit for a coal company to build a road within a protected forest area. But this creates a lot of questions for us. Why does this minister give the permission for a mining company to build a road within a forest that should be protected? What are the power dynamics behind this? How can we explain this to the public other than just the formalities that the minister said and explained to the public? What are the real reason behind the permit? And this is particularly a very important forest because it has wildlife nature, elephant population, tiger population, and opening the road in the middle of the forest will trigger a lot of deforestation. So we managed to see the link, the political parties behind the minister. So the minister comes from a certain political parties that, the same political parties also has the governor, or the governor of the area is from the same political party, and the mining company that built the road is belong to a tycoon named Peter Sondak. He's a very prominent conglomerate in Indonesia, but he's not using his real name. So we need to dig out the paper companies, the beneficial owners deeds to make sure that we manage to identify the real owners behind these companies. Lastly, one of the stories that we just recently did is one from OCCRP, Organized Crime and Corruption Reporting Project. We did this collaboration exposing the link between Sukanto Tanoto, one of the very well-known tycoon in Indonesia. It has palm oil companies, prop companies all over the country. The story comes from OCCRP when they did this Open Lux project with Süddeutsche Zeitung in Germany and dozens of media across Europe. One of the names that were found in the Luxembourg beneficial owners data was Sukanto Tanoto. He bought this large building in Munich worth 350 million euros. We linked that large purchase with human rights violation and deforestation that happened in Sumatra, where several indigenous communities were victims, were evicted from their indigenous land because of Sukanto Tanoto's company. The link between the story in Munich and what really happened in Sumatra really gave the contrast and really bring the story home for our audience. Because if we just did the story about the Munich purchase, a lot of people cannot see the relevance, why this is important for the audience, why this is important for the environment. But when they see the connection that this is the same guy who did the deforestation and who are responsible for the indigenous community affection, they immediately can see why this is important for them. So those are several examples of how we try to connect the dots and really bring home the message that in order to make people's environmental stories relevant to the people, we need to go one step further and see and really expose the relevance for the public about the power dynamics and the connection with global supply chains. I think that's all I want to share, and I'm looking forward for the discussion. Thank you, Gustavo.
Thanks, Wahyu. This is great. Congratulations on the great work of Tempo. And I think you brought an important question about dealing with power, right, from government and corporation. And maybe we should start with a question which was directed to you. And let me just say, please keep sending your questions. We just checked our coordinator, Boyang Ling, who's also helping producing the session. We checked and we can stay 10 minutes more. I hope our panelists can stay 10 minutes over 10 a.m. US Eastern time, because I think we're getting great questions. So Wahyu, Jesset is asking, how do you deal with government and corporate backlash in your reporting? The question mentioned that some of the countries that we are working on, including Indonesia and other countries of Southeast Asia, has some of the most dangerous environments for journalists nowadays. So how to deal with that? And I ask you, Wahyu, and if others want to contribute, please.
Sure. Yeah, I agree that Indonesia, Philippines, Myanmar, and some of the countries in the peninsula, the Asian peninsula, Laos, Cambodia, it's become very dangerous for journalists. In Indonesia, last year only we have 84 cases of violence against journalists, where reporters get beaten because of the reporting, and we still have 9 journalist murder that has not been solved. The way we try to deal with this threat is, first of all, of course, it comes back to the quality of your work. You have to make sure that you don't leave any loophole. Make sure that you give the right to reply for all the people that you target in your stories. Of course, that's number one. But that's also is not a guarantee. So what we did in Indonesia, we tried to create this committee of journalist protection, working with human rights activists, NGO in different parts of the country. So we have this alliance ready to support us whenever a violence happens to one of us. And this network really helped because it gave us the platform and the legal support that we need if anything happens.
Thank you. Anyone wants to comment? Maybe Bram, I think we're okay if we shared, but you had a tough experience in 2018, 2017 in Venezuela, working and also in the conflict state. So can you elaborate a little bit? How do you think journalists can protect while working in difficult environments?
Yep, thank you, Gustavo. I got arrested in 2017 in Venezuela for reporting on an issue which was something the government really wanted to cover up because they're involved in illegal mining through state security forces that actually collaborate with Colombian rebel groups. They have tacit and sometimes very explicit agreements in the territory to run illegal mines. And since we were basically snooping around and trying to understand what was going on, we got picked up by army and the National Guard, who basically straight away told me that I was working for the US intelligence or the political opposition. I'm Dutch, by the way. So what I basically learned from that experience, which wasn't, I think we got out pretty quickly without any grave human rights abuses, which in comparison with local colleagues was like a best case scenario. I think in that sense, what really worked was that we already had a very big network in Venezuela with local activists, human rights lawyers, even the church who had a pretty important role in basically getting the word out, and embassies in the European Union. And I think most of them were actually like sources because I wanted to interview them. But since they also belonged to a network we had in Venezuela, there was a very quick response that also led to a response by the Committee for the Protection of Journalists and the IFJ. So I think that if you are conducting work that you know that is very risky, or in an area where there are actors that might want to conduct harm towards you, it is very good to have like not only your personal security protocols set up, but basically also a network that can be activated to get the word out and to make the right phone calls when something happens. I think that was the most negative experience I ever experienced being a journalist. And besides that, what I always like to tell is that one might fear the gold trafficker or the armed actors, but in the end, it has proven that situations have proven that it's easier to access traffickers, promise them full anonymity, have good conversation with them, and that the actual threats that are coming after the publication are oftentimes coming from the corporate angle and government sectors, and not so much from the criminal actors involved.
Thank you, Brian. I have a question here, actually two questions, one from Harry Carter, another one from Yanini Perez. I think they relate. Maybe I'll ask Annika and Jessica to tackle this question. Both are asking like how to tackle such a daunting task, like to investigate a global supply chain, where to start, how do you break down your steps to investigate, and someone who wants to start looking at extractive companies, where they should look at how to start. I think this is, and how to organize such a task.
Well, on my end, I certainly think it's intimidating as well to look at a global supply chain as big as the supply chain that we have here in Brazil. I'm really excited about the possibilities of data journalism, because it opens doors that we, as journalists previously didn't have at our fingertips. You're able to get, millions and millions of documents and cross-check them and put the pieces together and connect the dots in ways that just wouldn't have been possible before. And so on my end, that's how I am tackling it. But then there's also the component of once something pops up in sort of your data world, then you have to hit the street and start talking to people and figuring out what that means, and showing people in the same way that you would do in previous investigative styles.
You're on mute, Gustavo.
I'm sorry. I was asking if Annika would like to contribute.
Yeah, sure. I was actually going to emphasize a similar point. I think you can start with just doing a lot of research, which media reports have already been published, which reports by NGOs have been done, and then see who's already working to collect a lot of data and information. Because usually there's organizations that are working against certain processes or on certain topics. And as a journalist, you can go to them and ask them to explain to you really complex systems and processes and which data they've already collected. And also the methodology of how they're collecting their data, because if you end up using it as a journalist, you need to be able to back up that methodology. But then after you get the data, it's really important also to zero in on specific examples, like Jessica was saying, and actually go to the field and find out the human stories. What's the impact on the community? What's the impact on the environment? Because I think even once we describe these larger supply chain processes and the impacts they're having, to really get people to care, we have to actually go to the field and tell those human stories and report them in the media platforms that have a wide audience in the local community and also internationally. Use multimedia, and even break these stories and processes and data down on social media, find ways to share the issues in really bite-sized information that people can relate to. So that's what I would say. And also using a lot of data visualization to communicate the broader trends. There's a lot of free online softwares these days like Flourish and Data Wrapper, which you can learn in just a couple of hours, and it doesn't require, you know, GIS or coding experience, but they can really help to communicate these really complex trends and some which can often be overwhelming. I agree.
Thanks, Annika. And Brian, I'm seeing you want to add something. I'm going to add a question that you can help us to address as well with this issue of how to tackle investigations. Gloria Pallares, which is also a Rainforest Investigations Network fellow, noticed that you mentioned it's not always easy to distinguish between the bad guy and the good guys. And she's asking how to approach this contradiction when reporting. So we're asking how to deal with such a daunting task, investigating supply chains, but how to also work on the field and identify who is bad, who is good.
Thank you, Gustavo. I'll try to merge the two questions in one answer. I raised my hand because I thought it was very interesting to listen to Jessica and Annika about how to tackle these supply chain investigations, basically from a perspective where the data tells you that something's up, or an investigation tells you something's going on and you hit the street. I think we sometimes work the other way around, since we're already very invested in mining conflicts in Venezuela. We have a lot of sources already, and we're conducting a lot of field work. So then we hear things or new trafficking routes or new phenomena. And the issue we often have is that it's great if we can access data sets, but if we actually investigate trafficking of illegal gold, the whole idea is that there is no paper trail, there is no data set, there is no document with evidence. The gold leaves from the mines, it's hidden already in someone's boots or wherever, and then it's taken in canoes over jungle rivers to the next country. So there is no way to identify how this works by looking at a paper trail, which is often very it makes editors nervous, because we might have multiple sources, which can be the miner, the trafficker, the corrupted customs official who shuts an eye to the trafficking. And what I basically, as a journalist and a writer, then decide is, if you have multiple sources who don't know each other but are making the exact same argument and have the same information, we tend to go with the argument if it's backed up by multiple sources. And then when it reaches like a transit country, we can access data sets about maybe you produced less gold than what you exported, so maybe this is an indicator that traffic gold enters your country because you're not producing so much. And then we try to combine quantitative information with qualitative information, which is risky if you don't really do it thoroughly. But I think that's the way we try to work. Otherwise, there is no way to basically identify these black markets and trafficking economies. But I must admit, it does make the editors a bit nervous sometimes. And the other questions are basically about whether we attach value to bad guys and good guys. Well, personally, this is an ongoing debate in your head, but I try my most best to not let that be reflected in the text. I think what's most important is just to give a voice to the people you interact with, and let them make their case, whether you think they're the bad guy or the good guy, which is a fluid concept in my own thinking. But I think if you just enable all the stakeholders to explain themselves, and if you can reflect that in the article, then it's basically up to the reader to decide how he or she feels with what's really going on, without you pushing it too much as a writer or a journalist. And I think that's what I like as well about journalism in general.
Thank you, Brian. I think we're getting to close to the end of our session. I'm going to ask one last question and ask you, all of you, to give your point of view in 1 minute max. So we have two questions, one from Mike, another one from Eve, asking about impact. How do you know how you're generating impact? What's the impact for you? And there's a question like, when do you know the story is published? I mean, is when this impact is finished, sorry. When the investigation is finished. is when you got to this impact. So let us hear from you. Maybe we should do the other way around this time. Wahyu, Jessica, Bram, and Annika about impact.
Yeah.
Sorry, Wahyu, not me.
I'll go just very briefly before Jessica. I think question of impact has always been in everyone's mind. As a journalist, we want to make impact. We want to improve the society, and sometimes that could be our nightmares. Do we publish it in the right way? Have we reached the right audience? Have we make some changes from through our publication? And I think numbers always help. So let's start with reach. How many people read our numbers? We have analytics to prove that. But also, impact can also happen over time, and it's very important to track it. We have a special team in our audience development unit in our newsroom that really see how stories develop over time and what kind of changes happen, and keep publishing them part of the reporting to make sure that we also notice if there's changes on the ground. Jessica?
Well, I think as journalists, I think our end goal is really change. And so that's the impact that we're looking for. And I think that the way really to do that is just to keep, keeping it on people's radar. And that's why it's great to have, so many journalists from so many organizations working locally, internationally, to tell these stories in different ways. As I mentioned before, the beef supply chain has been, in the spotlight for some time. And so the companies themselves are actually making more significant efforts to try to map these. They say they're trying to map these supply chains. So I think, that's a great win. There's more to do for sure. But like I said, we just have to keep hitting it. We just have to keep telling this story in different ways, in magazine, in TV, online, and so that people know that it's still a big issue.
It's a very difficult question because we often get excited when we get republished, or when government officials respond, or when there's a policy change because of your reporting. But then months later, you basically see that it's so ineffective or nonsense. So oftentimes when sources in the field ask me, why should I speak to you, or what's in it for me? I like to basically respond, well, basically nothing, because even if there's like something we as journalists consider impact, it might not be impact for you. But the only thing that we can offer you is basically to give you a voice, and that people will read about what your argument is, or what you might find important, because we're investigating this. And then it's awareness creation, and basically giving a voice to the voiceless, which sounds very cliche, but I think it's one of the most important impacts that we actually can have.
Thank you so much, Bram. And Annika?
Yeah, I really reflect what most of the other panelists have said. I think it's difficult, but also so important to track the impacts and to always be thinking about them. At InfoNow, the kinds of impacts we usually track are the awareness raising impacts, like other media covering the story or a public official citing the story. But of course, that's just the first step. We need real change to come from the stories we're writing about. So we also look at institutional actions and policy changes. But yeah, it's really difficult, and I think there's never really an endpoint to tracking the impact. To answer your second question, it's really important also for us to keep doing follow-ups and to do follow-up stories. One investigation is not enough. So if from our investigation, we can inspire other journalists to follow up on what we've investigated and see what's happening and still be pushing for more action, that's really important. And I think we also need to always provide solutions and action points in our stories. Sometimes we can be very like doom and gloom as journalists, but then once someone consumes your story, what are they going to be able to do? So if at least we can pinpoint organizations that are doing good work that maybe you can support, or policy changes that need to happen, or companies that need to be further investigated, we need to really provide our readers and viewers with those actions that they can take after seeing our story.
Thank you, Annika. So just to be punctual on our delay, I'll start finishing now. I want to just thank you everybody for being here. And we are so thankful to Annika, Bram, Jessica, and Wahyu for today's conversation. I know we're finishing with some pending questions, but I'll make sure those questions get to our panelists. And I appreciate also some manifestations of similar work being done in other parts of the world. So I'm glad this session seems useful for all of you. So our recording will be online at the PulitzerCenter.org in the coming days, so feel free to share. I want to especially thank my colleagues at the Pulitzer Center, especially Piotr Mears, our producer for this session, and Boyang Lin, our coordinator. And we appreciate our audience for joining us today. And for those who are able, please remember we are a nonprofit journalism organization, and so we depend on donor support. Please donate today and become a Pulitzer Center champion at any level to gain exclusive benefits as part of our spring campaign. And please check our PulitzerCenter.org events to see additional panels and events during our Environmental Redefined conference. Our next event is State of Environmental Reporting, today at 2 p.m. US Eastern Time. And please stay with us a few minutes longer to take a brief survey after we officially end today's session. Thank you for being with us today, and we hope you join us throughout the week. Thank you so much, and see you. Thank you, all the panelists.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Have a nice day, all.